Everyone who works here disappears, the janitor had whispered to Marla the day she started. She'd laughed it off as nothing more than an attempt to spook the new girl. Every office had its share of urban legends, right? But now, as Marla stood alone in the dimly lit hallway of the Davenhall Corporation building, she wasn't so sure it was just a joke. The silence was oppressive, thick like a blanket wrapped too tightly around her chest. It was nearly midnight, and the building, a towering structure of steel and glass, was supposed to be empty. Everyone had left hours ago, but there was something unsettling in the air. She could feel it creeping up her spine, like unseen eyes were watching her, waiting. Marla shivered and forced herself to focus on the task at hand. She had stayed late to finish a project her boss, Mr. Wilkes, had kindly demanded be done by morning. The promotion was within her reach, and she couldn't afford to slip up. Still, the eerie quiet of the office wasn't helping. She could swear the walls were closing in on her. As she made her way down the corridor toward the break room, the dim overhead lights flickered, casting shadows that danced at the edge of her vision. She paused, heart pounding in her chest, and glanced over her shoulder. The hallway stretched behind her, empty, silent, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She was not alone. The break room was unnaturally still, bathed in the cold light of a single flickering fluorescent bulb. Marla hurried to the coffee machine, her hands trembling as she fumbled to pour water into the reservoir. "Get it together," she muttered to herself, trying to shake off the growing dread. As the machine hummed to life, she turned to look out the window. The city sprawled out below, the streets alive with distant car horns and the flicker of headlights. But inside this building, it was like another world, a hollow, dead space. Suddenly, a soft thud echoed behind her, and Marla's blood turned to ice. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat. No one was there. The door to the hallway stood ajar, swaying slightly as if someone had just passed through. Her heart hammered in her chest. She stepped forward cautiously, peering into the dark corridor. "Hello?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no answer, only the distant hum of the air conditioning. Marla returned to her desk, the unease gnawing at her insides. She sat down and stared at her computer screen, trying to refocus on the spreadsheets in front of her, but her mind kept drifting back to the janitor's warning. Everyone who works here disappears. Her eyes wandered to the cubicles around her, row after row of empty desks. How many people had been in this very spot, alone at night, and never left? A creaking noise snapped her attention to the far side of the room. It was faint, like the groan of old wood, but it didn't make sense in a modern steel structure. Marla's pulse quickened. Slowly, she rose from her chair, stepping lightly as she moved toward the source of the sound. The farther she walked, the colder the air became. It wasn't just the temperature, though. It felt like the warmth was being sucked out of the room, leaving a chilling void in its place. The sound grew louder, more distinct, and soon she found herself standing in front of the elevator doors. They opened. Marla stumbled back, her breath hitching in her throat. The elevator should have been locked at this hour. No one else was here. She stood frozen, staring into the gaping maw of the open elevator. It was pitch black inside, not the normal dim light of a functioning lift. The darkness felt alive, pulsing like it was breathing, waiting for her. Then, a whisper. Her name. "Marla." The voice was faint, but unmistakable. It crawled across her skin like icy fingers, and her stomach twisted in terror. She stepped back, heart pounding in her ears, and slammed her hand against the button to close the elevator doors. They slid shut, but not before she saw a glimpse of something. Something standing in the back of the elevator. A shadow, tall and thin, with impossibly long limbs that seemed to bend in unnatural directions. She bolted back to her desk, grabbing her bag and throwing her things inside. She needed to leave, now. Her phone buzzed on her desk, and she jumped, her nerves frayed. It was a message from Mr. Wilkes. Stay late tonight. There's more work to do. Her heart skipped a beat. Why would he message her now? She hadn't told him she was still here. Another message came through. Come to the 13th floor. Marla stared at the screen, her mind racing. There was number 13th floor. The building went from 12 to 14, like so many others that omitted the number out of superstition. But the message was clear. Her hands trembled as she typed back. There is number 13th floor. She watched as the 3 dots appeared, indicating a response was coming. Yes, there is. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't dare reply. The phone buzzed again. The elevator is waiting. Marla's pulse raced. She grabbed her bag, intending to leave the building, to run out into the city and never look back. But as she reached the door, something stopped her, an invisible force holding her in place. The lights flickered, and the air in the office thickened, pressing down on her like a weight. Her phone buzzed again. You belong to the building now. The elevator dinged. Marla turned, her body moving against her will, like she was being pulled by invisible strings. Her feet dragged her toward the open doors. The darkness inside beckoned, and deep within the void, she saw it again. The shadowy figure, its grotesque limbs bent at unnatural angles, waiting for her. Her heart screamed at her to run, but her body wouldn't obey. The elevator doors began to close, and she knew if they closed, it would be over. She would be trapped, swallowed by whatever was lurking in the shadows of that 13th floor that wasn't supposed to exist. She lurched forward, slamming her hand against the closing doors, forcing them open. The cold, dark air from the elevator brushed against her skin like a deathly caress. But this time, when she peered inside, it wasn't just a shadow. It was a face, distorted, grotesque, and grinning. And then it spoke, its voice like the scrape of nails against metal. You're the next offering. It was a face, distorted, grotesque, and grinning. And then it spoke, its voice like the scrape of nails against metal. But she didn't have time to process it. A scream echoed through the halls, a scream that could only belong to her. The last thing she heard before everything went black was the hum of the elevator moving, the gears grinding, taking her up to the 13th floor, where no one ever returned. Eli stood at the base of the towering corporate skyscraper, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and unease. Davenhall Financial, the pinnacle of the city's corporate world, loomed over him like a colossus of steel and glass. It was his first day at the new job, fresh start, a chance to make something of himself. Everyone knew Davenhall was the place where fortunes were made, where careers skyrocketed, and where lives were transformed overnight. But nobody told him about the whispers. The email he'd received the night before, unsigned and ominous, was still fresh in his mind. Once you're in, you're never out. Success demands more than hard work. It demands everything. At first, he thought it was a prank, probably some coworker messing with the new guy. But now, standing in the shadow of the building, a cold sensation crept up his spine. Something about this place felt wrong. The lobby was cold and pristine, all marble floors and sleek design. It was almost too perfect, too clean, as if it had been frozen in time. Eli swallowed hard as he walked up to the front desk, where the receptionist, a woman with sharp features and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, greeted him. "Welcome to Davenhall," she said, her voice smooth but flat. "Mr. Wilkes will see you now." Eli's first week passed in a blur of meetings, trainings, and onboarding, the weight of expectation pressing down on him. Everyone here seemed driven to the point of obsession. His coworkers never left the building until well after midnight. And even then, There were always whispers in the halls, hushed conversations about what it takes to make it here. By Friday, he was starting to understand. The grind was relentless, but so was the promise of promotion, of wealth beyond imagination. People climbed the ladder fast here if they were willing to sacrifice. That evening, after most of the office had cleared out, his manager, Karen, stopped by his desk. "You're doing well," she said, her eyes gleaming in the fluorescent light. "But if you really want to get ahead, there's something you should know." Eli's stomach clenched. There was something off about her. The way she stood just a little too close. The faint smell of burnt ozone clinging to her clothes. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Karen's smile widened, but it didn't touch her eyes. "You've heard the whispers, right? About what it takes to get promoted." Eli nodded slowly. "People keep mentioning it, but no one's really explained." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's simple. This building, it's alive, and it's hungry. To move up, you have to give it a piece of yourself. A small part at first, but the higher you go, the more it takes." Eli laughed nervously, thinking it was some twisted joke, but Karen's expression didn't change. "It's not a joke, Eli. Everyone here has done it. Look around. Don't you think it's strange how fast people rise here? How quickly they get rich?" He swallowed, feeling the weight of her words. What does that even mean? How do you give it a piece of yourself?" Karen's eyes gleamed with something dark and hollow. "You'll see." The next day, the promotion offer came. It was faster than Eli had expected, almost too fast. His boss, Mr. Wilkes, called him into his office with a grin that made Eli's skin crawl. "You've been doing good work, Eli," Wilkes said, his fingers drumming rhythmically on the sleek desk. "And at Davenhall, we reward ambition. I'm offering you a promotion assistant vice president of acquisitions." The next day, the promotion offer came. It was faster than Eli had expected, almost too fast. His boss, Mr. Wilkes, called him into his office with a grin that made Eli's skin crawl. "You've been doing good work, Eli," Wilkes said, his fingers drumming rhythmically on the sleek desk. "And at Davenhall, we reward ambition. I'm offering you a promotion assistant vice president of acquisitions." Eli blinked, his mind racing. Assistant VP? After just a week? It was unheard of. "There's just one thing," Wilkes continued, leaning forward slightly. "There's a process, a rite of passage, you could say. If you're ready, we'll do it tonight." Eli felt a knot form in his stomach. The words Karen had whispered echoed in his mind. The building is alive. It takes a piece of you. But the thought of turning down the offer seemed unthinkable. He had worked so hard for this, for a chance like this. He needed this. "What's the process?" Eli asked, his voice tight. Wilkes smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Come to the 40th floor at midnight. I'll explain everything then." By the time midnight rolled around, Eli's nerves were frayed. He stood outside the elevator, staring at the button for the 40th floor. He hadn't even known there was a 40th floor. It wasn't on any of the directories, and the elevator button had only appeared after Wilkes' meeting. The ride up felt endless, the elevator humming with a low, rhythmic vibration that seemed to pulse through his bones. His reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls looked pale and nervous, like he was heading to his own execution. When the doors slid open, Eli stepped out into a hallway bathed in an unnatural, dim red light. The walls seemed to pulse slightly, like the building itself was breathing. His heart pounded as he walked down the narrow corridor, a sense of something watching him growing with every step. At the end of the hallway stood a massive set of double doors. Beyond them, Eli could hear voices, a low, chanting hum that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The room was vast and empty. save for a small group of people standing in a circle in the center. Wilkes was there, along with Corinne and a few other executives Eli recognized. They stood with their eyes closed, murmuring in unison. In the middle of the circle, a faint outline shimmered, a dark, twisted shape, something that writhed and pulsed, barely visible but undeniably there. "Welcome," Wilkes said without turning around, his voice louder than the others. "You're about to take the first step toward true success." Eli felt a cold sweat break out across his skin. "What is that?" Wilkes turned to face him, his eyes gleaming with that same inhuman light. "It's the spirit of Davenhall, the force that drives this company. It's been here since the beginning, and it demands loyalty, sacrifice." The figure in the center of the circle seemed to swell as if it could sense Eli's presence. It was no longer just a shadow, it had form now. A mass of limbs, too long and thin, moving with a jerky, unnatural motion. Its face, if it could be called a face, was a mess of contorted features, as though it was still learning how to wear human skin. "Every promotion, every bit of success here comes with a price," Wilkes said softly. "And now it's your turn." Eli's throat went dry. "What do you want from me?" Karen stepped forward, her smile wide and empty. "Just a piece of you, Eli. A small piece. The spirit feeds on your ambition, your drive. In return, it gives you everything." Wilkes held out his hand. "Do you accept?" Eli's mind raced. This couldn't be real, none of this could be real. But the shimmering, twisted thing in the center of the room seemed all too real. And so did the cold terror coursing through his veins. He thought of the promotion, the wealth, the status. He thought of the life he dreamed of, the future that could be his if he just said yes. Slowly, reluctantly, he reached out and took Wilkes' hand. The pain was instant and excruciating. The moment their hands touched, Eli felt something rip inside him. It was as if his very essence was being torn apart. His ambition, his drive, being pulled from his body and offered up to the thing in the center of the room. He screamed, but no sound came out. His vision blurred as the world around him seemed to melt and twist, the walls of the building pulsating with a sickening rhythm. The spirit loomed closer, its malformed face inches from his, grinning as it fed on him. When it was over, Eli collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. His body felt hollow, as if something vital had been stolen from him. Wilkes stood over him, smiling. "Congratulations," he said softly. "You've made the first of many sacrifices." Eli's eyes fluttered shut as darkness consumed him. The next morning, he was promoted. The office congratulated him. His desk was upgraded and his paycheck doubled. But as he sat at his new desk, staring blankly at his computer screen, Eli realized something terrible. He couldn't feel anything. Ambition, excitement, even fear. Everything that had once made him him was gone. All that remained was the hollow, gnawing emptiness inside. The constant, growing hunger for more. More power, more success, more sacrifices. And now, just like the rest of them, he would never be able to leave.